So hello, welcome back to another sunny day in Bavaria. Today I'm talking about the perfect backswing and how to make one. So, what is a neutral backswing? Well, I suppose a neutral backswing to a certain extent is a backswing that makes it easy to get the club back onto the golf ball with a neutral path and face angle. Neutral means that the club head is moving down the target line and the face is pointing towards the target. That would be totally neutral. The perfect backswing, however, is a backswing where it makes it easy for you to get back to the golf ball. And even if that means you're coming with a slightly out to in path or in to out path, a slightly open or closed club face, as long as it's happening the same every time, you're going to find your golf ball. And as long as it's happening the same every time, you're going to be able to play golf because you've got the consistency to know the kind of shot shape and distance that you're hitting, and therefore where you've got to aim when you're playing the game. And that really is one of the biggest things. So you won't always see the same end of backswing position with every player, and most certainly you'll see some big contradictions out there, whether it be Mr. Garcia with the club over here or Mr. Furyk with the club over there. As long as they're getting the club back neutral on the golf ball, who cares where they were up here? For yourselves, however, the easier you can make this for you, so the better. So what I'm trying to do today is explain to you all of the kind of constituent parts of the backswing and what effect they have on path and face angle. And therefore you can kind of get an idea, if you kind of combine these different movements, these different joints in your body in the right way, that's how you're going to get a neutral and the so-called perfect backswing. So what we're going to have to do is kind of go through the movements that you're going to need to make in your backswing and give them a kind of a positive and a negative score. Now, don't get me wrongly, I'm not talking about negative being bad, I'm just talking about it being the opposite to positive in the way that it affects the path or the face angle. So if I am moving the path to the outside, that would be a negative, not because it's bad, but because it's out to in. And if I'm moving the path to the inside, that would be a positive, not because it's better than a negative, but because it gives me a way of actually scoring what I'm doing. If I am opening the club face, we'll call that positive, and if I'm closing the club face, we'll call that negative. And that way, if I get enough positives and negatives together in the backswing, I've got neutral. You get where I'm going? Cool. So let's just go through it one by one and see what effect these movements actually have. So what we've got to basically do is go through the joints in your body and see what effect do they have. And we're going to start with the wrists because they can actually make three different movements. The first one we'll call just hinging. Hinging the club up along your lead thumb almost. And that will have a pretty neutral effect on both the path and on the face. However, relative to the target line, it can have an effect if you do it in the wrong sequence. So if you were to start your backswing like this, you can see that that's pushing the club shaft to the outside, although it's not really doing an awful lot with the club face. It is opening the club face relative to the target line. So it was pointing at the target, now it's not. And this is probably where golf does get a little bit tricky and complicated, because there are different interpretations, and this is probably why you will go to different golf professionals and they seem to be talking about something else simply because they've interpreted it differently. And that's why I would recommend that you kind of find one golf professional, and when you understand him or her, then stay with them, because you're on the same wavelength. As soon as you get kind of a second opinion, you're going to get what seems like contradictory information. It might just be the pro trying to explain it to you in a different way. So we've got that first one out of the way. What else can the wrists do? Well, they can bend back. And we'll talk about the lead wrist here, bending back. I think that's a little bit easier than saying that I've got some kind of flexion going on here. You can see what a dramatic effect that has on the shaft. So the shaft goes positive, and what a dramatic effect that has on the face. It closes the face, so the face goes negative. The opposite to that would be cupping the lead wrist. And by cupping the lead wrist, you can actually see that the shaft goes to the outside. That would be negative, and it will have, you can see it up here, maybe easier. The cupping of the wrist will tend to open the face. So, a positive there. The next joint is actually not really a joint at all. We're talking about the rotation here of the lower arms. Your wrists in themselves can't rotate without your lower arm rotating. And obviously you can see that the rotation anti-clockwise will close the face. That would be a negative, and clockwise will open the face. There is also a slight influence on the shaft plane. If you don't allow any of the other joints to do anything and just rotate, keeping the joint still, you will get a slight kind of negative in the anti-clockwise and positive in the clockwise when we're talking about the path. Moving up then, the next joint is the elbow, and both elbows have the same effect on path and on face. They will bring the path to the inside, making it positive, and they'll open the face. You can see this, and best from this camera obviously, when this lead elbow bends, how the shaft goes to the inside and the face will open. And it's even more dramatic when the trail elbow does that as well. You keeping up? Cool. Next joint are the shoulder joints, and we're using the shoulder joints really to lift the golf club. Now again, if you look from this perspective, the same as when I was hinging, there isn't an awful lot of change in path or in face. However, if I were to do it at the wrong time in the golf swing, then you are actually going to see that the thing is going to go into a negative aspect. So if you get the sequence or the order of the movements in the backswing wrong, then what was a neutral movement can become then a negative movement. But again, negative not necessarily being a bad thing. It's just going to need a positive somewhere. Now we're talking about shoulders and upper body. Now the shoulders and upper body are actually doing two things in the backswing. The first swing is simple to understand, is basically rotation of the shoulders, and rotating the shoulders is going to pull the club to the inside. That means it's going positive. When however I turn my shoulders, I will also be tilting and bowing my spine. So the shoulder will tilt down and the spine will bow, and that will have the opposite effect, moving the path to the outside and closing the face. So where I turn the shoulders is more moving the club to the inside and relative to the target line, opening the face. The tilt is moving it to the outside and closing the face. And you will see then when you put these things together how they kind of even one another out. And by evening one another out, they are actually giving you a neutral movement. Finally, we've got the hips. And the hips are obviously turning light the shoulders, opening the face to the path and pulling the club to the inside and making it positive. So we get this nice kind of list here where you can see the effects that the different movements are going to have on face and path, and all you've got to do is pick out the ones that you want to use or can use depending on the physiology. So if you're stiff and can't get as much bend going on here, you're going to have to do something else to neutralize the shaft plane because you haven't got that. If on the other hand, like Dustin Johnson, you get extreme amounts of tilt and bow in your shoulders in the backswing, you might have to do something with your wrists in order to equal that out. And this is more or less, I think, intuitively what children and young golfers actually do in order to find a position at the top of their backswing which makes it easy for them to get back down. But the more question marks you have at the top of your backswing, the more positive or negative you are, the more you're going to have to then change that and put in other movements in your downswing to get yourself back into a neutral position at impact. So how do I do it? Well, or how do I teach it? Unfortunately, what we say and what we do as golf teachers is sometimes not the same thing. I am trying at the beginning of my backswing to do 3 things at the same time. I have the feeling of starting the backswing with the oblique muscles in the lead side, which get this kind of tilting going, but at the same time I'm rotating my shoulders. So my upper body is rotating and tilting and bowing. So you can see that these 2 movements together give me a relatively neutral path and a slightly closed face. At the same time, I'm lifting the club. So I'm turning, bowing, and lifting the club at the same time. Now, if you see this in slow motion, you'll say, well, John, why do you want the club out here? Well, it usually isn't, and when I make a swing, it actually tends to get more on the inside, simply because my trail elbow tends to bend a little bit too early, something which I've picked up unfortunately over the years, and also because we have other forces working on us. You are giving the club inertia, you're giving it momentum, and it's trying, if you're rotating, to go in the direction you want. So unless you hold your wrists stiff, you are going to have a problem that the club is going to go back behind you anyway. So the feeling of getting 2 negatives, the bow and the lifting of the arms, I'm going to be able to keep the club basically out in front of me, which is what I want. When I get to a roundabout kind of hip height or a little higher, I'm then actively hinging the wrists and also bending the trail arm. That is going to have a neutral effect as far as the hinge goes, but a positive effect as far as the trail elbow goes. And this lifting continues to around about trail shoulder height, where I'm actually going to be changing direction, because I can actually feel that I'm reaching the end of my mobility. Now, I haven't talked about the hips, although they have rotated with me, because I'm not consciously rotating my hips. On the contrary, I'm allowing them to be pulled round by the shoulder rotation. And that means that because I have a certain amount of mobility in my upper body, I don't really think about that, and I will actually start the movement, and you won't see a great deal of things happening with my hips at all. However, after around about kind of 30-40 degrees of rotation in the shoulders, then the hips will automatically come around, and the resistance and tension I have in my legs will stop the hips over rotating. So after around about 45 degrees, they're finished. Most importantly for me, though, is that I haven't got the golf club too far back here or too far out here, so that I have neutral plane. I want it more or less pointing to the camera as you see it. And when I hinge my trail elbow and my wrists here, I'm taking the club up in a pretty neutral position, so you can see that it's more or less over or slightly outside my trail shoulder at the top of the backswing, with the lead wrist pretty straight. And that's what I would call neutral. Again, there isn't a right and a wrong. There's just a it repeats and it doesn't repeat. There isn't a better or a worse. There's just a it's easy to get back to the golf ball for me from there, or it's difficult. I couldn't get back to the golf ball repetitively from the position that Jim Furyk is in at the top of his backswing, or Eamon Darcy, or even Sergio Garcia. However, from the position that I find at the top of the backswing, I don't have too much trouble getting back at the golf ball in a repetitive manner. The power is generated by the use of the levers in the golf swing, and the levers in the golf swing is obviously the shaft using the wrist angles here. So I don't have to take a backswing like John Daly in order to get enough energy into my swing. it's quite okay. If you think of a John Rahm, he's finished about here, but he's also a big guy and he probably can't turn a great deal more than that. Because he's actually kind of not got as much hip and shoulder rotation and would be out here, he likes to get this wrist bowing, and that gets him back here. We've talked about Dustin Johnson, loads and loads of tilt in here, and then he's got one of those going on, and that helps him to control his path, and he's decided his path is more important in that sense intuitively as the face angle, which is pretty close at the top of the backswing, but he has a movement that we all know which helps him to get the club face into a square position at impact despite his position at the top of the backswing. A neutral backswing is keeping balance. It's all about understanding what the different joints in your body do, that you are going to have to move more than one joint, but the more joints that you move, the more difficult it is to coordinate the return to the golf ball. So get out there and have a look at your golf swing. Best thing, however, is to find yourself a decent professional who understands a bit about the game. Talk to him about this, whether he can understand where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to do, and so that you can go out there and look after your own golf swing to a certain extent, because you can't have your hand held on the golf course. If it goes pear-shaped out there, you've got to have an idea what has gone wrong and what you can do to change that. As ever, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to us yet, please do so. That helps me to get back a bit more regularly, and the little bell will give you notifications the next time I post a video. Keep well, look after yourselves, see you very soon. Bye-bye. Was that neutral? Probably not.